And in fact, some low-skilled jobs, of course, eliminated through these processes. So we have to ask ourselves what the relevance of that is in a situation where we know that women predominate in low-skilled labour versus high-skilled in many developing countries. That's just a reality that we have to change. What this is about, in a broad sense, is something which, when I was working for UNICEF in Vietnam, we very often, Vietnam as a number of the Asian countries of fairly rapid growth. Vietnam around that time had an annual growth of around 15% a year. I was working for UNICEF at that time, but we were involved in a discussion with the government about broad social policy, macroeconomic policy. And we wanted really to have a discussion about the different trajectories of growth that Vietnam could prioritize, and particularly in the context of the party, which is how things work in Vietnam. And we brought a former finance minister from Colombia to come and talk to them, a person who had been very much used in South America to share experience. And he had a very good way, I felt, of summarizing things. Maybe you've heard before, but I liked it. He talked about the distinction between poverty-based economies and productivity-based economies. Economies that need poor people to function versus economies that choose to operate in a way that prioritizes productivity. And really this is I think, a theme that runs through this topic of globalization, its impact on gender equality, that if we are to move towards productivity-based economies and away from economies that depend on poor, low-skilled, low-wage labor, we need to focus in particular on the situation of women and girls. We need to look at things like job learning programs, on-the-job skills upgrading, equal access to education, and also forms of, in the broadest sense, positive discrimination given cultural stereotypes and barriers to women's work in certain sectors. And of course, I'm thinking in particular of the STEM subjects in school, but also women's labour force participation in those sorts of areas of work. There's of course another angle, which I'm sure we'll talk about extensively today, which is migration. Of course, the economic pressures that have come, particularly for the poor, in the context of globalization, have pushed many women to migrate to find work. It's an extremely rational decision on their part. Sometimes they leave their own children behind in order to take care of the children or the elderly of the wealthy. And so women, both high-skilled and, broadly speaking, unskilled, they constitute an increasing proportion of cross-border labour flows. And of course, what we've also seen since 2008 with the financial situation and the increasing pressures, that's just accelerated. And again, the challenges of facilitating migration and having sensible policy that manages it in a way that is aligned with the rights and interests of women and girls, again, is something I'm sure you will talk about. But more broadly, of course, since 2008, I think it's a difficult position to take. That the markets are capable of regulating themselves in the interests of everyone. But still, even in 2015, the calls for collective action and moving away in a bold way from the current global financial architecture remain a pretty tough sell. And you can see that, for example, in bilateral investment treaties and bilateral free trade agreements, which have really allowed certain companies or actors to circumvent international agreed protection measures. So we need to look at the way in which the current global financial architecture can manage control of international capital flows, labour, and so on. And that, I think, is really what it's going to be so interesting to hear comes out of the discussions today. Really a focus on what can be done differently and what can work better. And I want to just, again, ground us in the political perspective on all of this. These questions are not, as Yasmin was saying, these are not abstract policy issues that have their home in university discussions, but they have to go from here into policy making and genuine impacts in the lives. In this case, in particular, we're focused on the lives of women and girls. And so we have to understand that these commitments that are getting made right now, a few blocks east of where we are, and that will continue, particularly in September, will be nailed down, those few blocks east of where we are about these sorts of discussions. They are about the duties and obligations that member states have, and the full range of actors have, to realise the rights of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the principles and ideas behind the Beijing Platform for Action, the provisions, the targets, the ambitions and aspirations that we will have in the Sustainable Development Goals, and beyond. So everything that's being spoken about here, we're going to, as UN Women, really be listening closely. We're really very, very interested, but also engaged on this topic and the work that you're all doing, the discussions you will have. And it's our job to help take that forward into those discussions, into that decision making, so that eventually these frameworks and agreements really reflect the best possible thinking and ideas on this area and others that really are so key to the lives of women and girls. So with that, I'd like to wish you a very successful meeting. I won't be able to stay for all of it, sadly, but I'm really looking forward to what I can be here for and what I'll hear about later. Thank you very much.
So thank you very, very much to Dean Jano and to Dan Seymour. As all of us here, really appreciate their introductions. I'm about to turn this over to Jenny McGill and to the first panel. But before I do so, I've been instructed to tell you all that there is a hashtag, gender and globalization, hashtag gender and globalization, and we want you to send lots of messages about what we're doing here today. So please, thank you all very much. And Jenny and the first panel, please.